So, this is the latest Rebel Wisdom podcast, an exciting one because this morning I did an interview with Jordan Peterson, which is the second interview that I've done and the first time that I've seen him since I saw him last October, which we then turned into the documentary Truth in the Time of Chaos and then Glitch in the Matrix. So yeah, it's really exciting to sort of see where he's at, and obviously the kind of trajectory that he's been on since then has just been so exponential. And yeah, I was really pleased with, like, we talked about sort of being a bit concerned he was getting burnt out, and didn't get a sense of that at all from meeting him. It was really, yeah, he was on good form, and I think we've got some really, really interesting stuff, and we're going to play some of it in this podcast, referring specifically to the Sam Harris debates, because that's just happened. And yeah, so he's done four debates with Sam Harris now, 2 in Vancouver, 1 in Dublin, 1 in London, on the subject of religion versus atheism. And the other thing is to kind of look forward to what else is coming up. We've just come back from the US, we've got a huge amount of content, some really exciting stuff. We just put out an interview with Paul van der Klee, the kind of pastor from Sacramento who's becoming kind of a little mini online celebrity because of his commentaries on Jordan Peterson.
And one person commented, the pastor of the IDW.
Paul van der Klee, officially the pastor of the IDW. Congratulations, Paul. It's now official. 3 YouTube comments making the same one makes it actually official. So, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. So I haven't been to any of these debates, but we've listened. Someone's very sneakily put some of the audio online, so I've listened to some of the stuff from Vancouver and some of the stuff from London a couple of nights ago. And we've also commented we've been interested ourselves in kind of this interplay between, like we've said quite a few times, for me, for you I think as well, Jordan Peterson represents a kind of potential reintegration of the sacred, grounding it in neuroscience, grounding it in mythology, and it's clear that Sam Harris is very sort of, the irony is they're both within this kind of loose collective called the IDW, but they've clearly got very different perspectives, which I guess is why so many people have gone to see them talk over the last kind of 4 dates.
For me, equally listening to the kind of the bootlegged stuff and kind of engaging with the debates, there is a sense of something new happening, in the sense that the traditional kind of new atheist argument has this real focus on religion almost as a political force and the kind of irrationality of it and all of that, some of which I can engage with and some of which I would even agree with. But what Peterson seems to be bringing and what these debates are kind of exploring is a different kind of exploration of maybe what we call the religious impulse, rather than looking specifically at religion, but taking that deeper level and looking at the impulse within us as, the biological, historical, cultural impulse in us, which is so deep to be religious creatures. And I feel like Jordan Peterson is coming or reintroducing that into the culture, and Sam is holding a different piece, which is a kind of warning against the fundamentalism that can come about with religion, which is a fair warning, definitely.
But the paradox that we're going to explore is that kind of viewpoint in itself, what you could call scientism, is in danger of becoming a fundamentalism itself.
If not already.
If not already. And this is something we're going to explore. So we're going to play a clip now. One of the first questions I asked Peterson about this, which was, started by talking about the IDW, which we'll put out at some future time. But what a lot of people are sensing from the IDW, why it's sort of quite intellectual dark web for any of our people who haven't been watching our other stuff, is there's a sense of they're asking really big questions and there's some really big ideas and great thinkers in it, but ultimately what I think people are tuning into is a sense of people thinking in public, and a sense of this is what it looks like for 2 people to engage in a generative dialogue around different ideas, and one that sort of builds. So yeah, that was the starting point of this question that we're going to roll now. There's a kind of intellectual curiosity and a sense of people thinking in public. And there's also a sense of maybe the potential for people to change their minds or to discover things during the conversation.
Yeah, well, that's partly the appreciation of the intelligence of the audience. It's like, and I would say it is actually the manifestation of the process of thinking that's more important than the conclusions that are generated. Even in these discussions that I've been having with Harris, like we are trying to argue out two different viewpoints, because Harris believes that values can be derived with unerring precision in some sense, using the proper methodology from facts. And I believe that it's more complicated than that there has to be intermediating structures, and that those are really narrative in their nature. So there's a technical argument, as well as a variety of sub-arguments about the relative role of traditional religion and so forth. But the outcome of the debate about those issues is partly what people are coming to the talks to see, to determine what should the conclusions be. But a much larger part, perhaps, is to observe and engage, at least by proxy, in the process of dialogue. And that's more important, because dialogue is the process by which complex problems are solved, which is what makes me a free speech advocate fundamentally. Well, it's not an advocate. It's like I realize that the protection for free speech is protection of the mechanism whereby complex social problems are solved. And we're the people in this group, and many other people as well, are acting out that dialogical process. And people are happy about that, as they should be.
Based on what Jordan Peterson was just saying, and then also listening to the debate, what really struck me was one particular moment when Sam Harris mentions, talks about the mystical, or I don't think he would refer to them as mystical experiences, but the deep experiences he's had through Buddhism and I believe psychedelics as well. And then he kind of makes a comment around, yeah, but I wasn't sort of, I'm not sure if gullible was the word, but something around that. I wasn't kind of gullible enough to kind of attribute that to something other than the workings of my own mind. And then Peterson says, you need to take a bigger dose. It's a great moment in the debate as well. And it really, even though it's kind of a fun moment, it also points to maybe for me, one of the deepest aspects of this, because in the debate, I get a sense that Harris, his understanding or his model of religion that he's putting out is one which is very much the structured religions. And Andrew Sweeney, in a recent piece on Rebel Wisdom, he mentioned that this model of a god with like a bearded man in the sky that the kind of atheists tend to use is not really the religious understanding or the model of God that people for whom religion is an important part of their lives use. No one who's serious about religion believes that type of model at all. And that's an interesting thing for me, because it gets back to that point of there's a difference between the internal experience we have, the internal religious experience, which is about experiencing the transcendent. It's not believing in anything. There's no belief. There's no space for belief. It's you have an internal experience. That is the religious drive, and that is the religious experience. I think Harris is absolutely right in the sense that you cannot take that experience. I can't have some deep psychedelic experience and be like, David, I've just figured out that Earth isn't Earth. We're actually all sitting on a massive green elephant. And I really need everyone to know this, so I'm really going to put this out there. You can't do that, because science is the language we use for you and me to agree on what we can both agree on. Like, look through this telescope, what do you see? Okay, well, I have a hypothesis about it. Well, you're going to try and disprove my hypothesis until we reach a synthesis where we can be reasonably, really, really sure about what's in that telescope. So those two things, they can't cross over. And integral studies is big on this. They can't cross over, but they can coexist. So finally, to Peterson's point around it's the discourse that's in a sense more important, that really connected with me when he says that, because they could do 1,000 debates and they are never, ever going to solve the science versus spirituality thing.
Yeah, I mean, listening to the recent one at the O2, you get the sense of, and I guess you got the sense since Peterson and Harris started talking that they're talking past each other.
Yeah.
And you frequently hear Sam accusing Jordan of not answering the question. And it's interesting listening to that because I didn't get that sense that Jordan was avoiding the question. Like, it's interesting, I mean, I've obviously listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff and listened to quite a lot of Sam Harris's stuff as well. Like, I've got a lot of respect for the Waking Up podcast. There was a Spectator article this morning, really good Spectator article, maybe we'll link to it under this, where the writer was saying he thinks Jordan Peterson has a bigger view than Sam Harris. That he understands Sam Harris's perspective better than Sam Harris understands Jordan Peterson's perspective. Now, I think that's true. Obviously, we've done a lot of stuff about Jordan Peterson. And just for a point, we did actually ask if Sam Harris would be available for an interview while he was here in London, but he wasn't, because I'd love to put some of this stuff to him. So Sam, if you're watching, we'd love to interview you. I'll give you a chance to respond. But I did get the sense that there was a frequent kind of reducing to caricature by Sam Harris that I didn't get that feeling from Peterson. Peterson started a huge amount of his comments with yes, but, like including, like he includes a lot of what Sam says. Sam kind of seems to continually reduce it down to the material or to the human. And Peterson says yes and, which is really interesting because we talk about integral theory quite a lot and the whole idea is yes and. And Peterson seems to be yes-anding Sam Harris an awful lot. He's saying, so Sam Harris is saying, well, hang on, are you saying that this was divinely inspired? How can you tell you that this book was divinely inspired? And Peterson is saying, well, we don't know where creativity comes from. That in some sense, creativity comes from somewhere we don't understand. And if you take creativity over millennia where things are refined and refined and refined, what is kept of that particular story has to reflect something, has to reflect some kind of divine reality. Or well, it has to reflect some kind of reality which you can choose to call divine or not. And Sam continued to kind of just brings it back to, no, this is just people's imagination, or just this is just. So I do feel, very frequently that Peterson does understand and incorporates Sam Harris's reductive worldview, but frames it within something more.
And I think that's a good point. Another thing that struck me, Sam Harris actually makes a really good point towards the end of the last debate, where he says, look, he starts talking about consciousness and our understanding of what consciousness is, and he said, that could have been a place we started this particular debate, and they may well have covered that in the first two. I'm not sure because I haven't seen them, but that is, I think, a really key question, because there's, we talk about the soft problem of consciousness and the hard problem, and the soft problem is effectively how is our neurobiology involved in how we perceive the world, and that's soft because we can do brain scans and we can look at it and we can experiment that, we can figure that out pretty much. The hard problem is, what is consciousness? And is it local or non-local? As in, is consciousness a quality of the universe which is everywhere and we happen to be recipients of that? Pantheism effectively. Or is it specifically just in the human mind? All of that question, that has not been answered yet.
And it also, there is a sense that it can't be answered.
Yeah.
So, and this is where I keep coming back to the sort of my real frustration with the more strict materialist types, because you can't have a worldview that says, well, we understand pretty much everything apart from consciousness. It's like, okay, so you can understand absolutely everything apart from the thing that's experiencing absolutely everything. That's a pretty big hole in your theory. And to maintain this kind of very dogmatic materialism without accepting that this is, you're like, okay, just give me that one miracle of the fact that we can experience anything, and then I'll explain everything. It's like, no, sorry. You're asking for it's a different kind of, because they argue that religion is sort of miraculous or magical thinking. It's like, no, actually you've got a magical thinking going on as well, just the same as believers.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well. And not just the magical thinking, but also the dangers of dogmatism that can come about. I'm not talking about Sam Harris here necessarily, just what my experience of very extreme materialists, because I'm one of the organizers of Breaking Convention, a psychedelics conference, and that is possibly the main tension at that conference, is we have neuroscientists and we have, I guess, psychonauts and explorers and artists and poets and all sorts. And the tension is between the materialist worldview and one which is more centered on the phenomenology of the experience and mystery and faith. Not faith isn't quite the right word, but the religious experience, let's call it. And I noticed what I pick up from the extreme materialists is a value system in which internal experience and the claims or the value of internal experience is lower than the value of scientific reason, always. That those two things there. Now, I think they should be on equal footing, but in different domains and serve different roles. But the smugness and the snideness comes, I think, partly from that value structure.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to start the second Jordan Peterson clip, because I think it talks to this sort of potential dogmatism on the materialist side as well. So roll number 2. I read a Spectator review of your recent conversation. I think you've now come to the end of your debates with Sam Harris, and they said that you expressed a little bit of irritation at when Sam didn't grasp some of the points that you were making, or that you didn't fully appreciate that he'd understood them. I also think that Sam Harris in particular, like, he's built a whole kind of personality, career, several books on this atheism position. Do you think that he can argue in good faith from that perspective? Could he turn around and say, well, actually, no, you're right, Jordan, this atheism thing is a bit simplistic?
No, I think he was conducting the discussion in good faith. I actually think that what Sam is doing is a good faith project. I think there's conceptual muddiness about it. But his basic premise is that we could come to an agreement that working to reduce unnecessary misery and suffering is a universal good. It's like, okay, fair enough. That seems like a reasonable proposition. I don't think it's a proposition of fact, and he claims that it is, but that doesn't matter. Still, it's fair enough, man. And then, so that's one proposition. Another proposition is, it would be really good if our systems of value weren't founded on error. And what do we have that's not error? Well, we have facts. We have objective facts. I mean, look at the technology. Look at what we've done with our science. It's like, you don't want to underestimate the utility of objective facts. So maybe we can ground the value structure in the facts. It's like, well, that would be good if we could do it. So, and then his ethic, let's say, is an amalgam of those two propositions. And I think that his project is honorable. And I think he's committed to it. He also, rightly, is concerned with the dangers of, the fundamentalist dangers of revealed truth, and so is very skeptical about the axiomatic claims of dogmatic religion. It's like, yeah, fair enough, but the mechanisms that he outlines to derive values from facts are insufficient in my estimation. I don't think that his argument is sufficiently sophisticated, even though I don't think that Sam is any less committed to an ethical good. It's not obvious to me that he is than I am, and he's argued and discussed fully in good faith as far as I'm concerned, with the odd error, because no one is negotiating 100% all the time in good faith. I mean, that's a standard that no one can achieve. But I think the discussions have been unbelievably productive, and we'll see that certainly the crowds are responding. I don't think the crowds would have been engaged if Sam wouldn't have been discussing in good faith, because the engagement is actually an indication that a good faith discussion is occurring. Otherwise, it gets dull very, very rapidly. We'll see what happens when the videos are released, and that'll be in August, once the sound is edited and all of that. And then people will have a public debate about how the discussion proceeded. I also think that each discussion built on the previous one, and that I think we both ended up more informed and more articulate than we started out. So that's a really good thing. I certainly understand his arguments much better than I did, a year ago, let's say.
So I think that exchange kind of illustrates the point that I made. I mean, I asked him whether Sam Harris was arguing in good faith, because if you look at it from this perspective, look, Sam Harris has written like 2 or 3 books on atheism. He is one of the most kind of noted celebrity atheists, with possible exception of Richard Dawkins. So he has a huge amount professionally at stake. So I guess my question about good faith was, is it possible for him to change his mind? And I was kind of looking, I really didn't know what Jordan would say about that. I had a sense that, that there was some irritation sometimes in the way Sam was kind of caricaturing or minimizing some of the things that he was saying. So I was genuinely interested in whether he thought that, and genuinely kind of, really interested in his response. Which I kind of found to be like, seemed to me to be a lot of generosity in there. It's like, I really value Sam's project, I think it's really good. And a lot of honesty about where he sees the conceptual moddiness and all the rest of it. But the interesting thing for me is reading below the comments on the recently leaked talk from London. And I've seen this a few times, like the Matt Dillahunty talk with Peterson as well. I find the sort of atheist types to be far more dismissive of Peterson. Oh, Sam destroyed Peterson, Peterson's avoiding answering the question. All of this, I find them far more dismissive of Peterson than I hear Peterson being of Harris, or generally Peterson's fans being of Harris, which is interesting. It kind of speaks to what we said before, the danger of a dogmatism in the atheist camp that can become a kind of new religion.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, something kind of came up for me, which I've thought in the past, which is when atheism does go that far, and it won't be all of his supporters, but it'll be, there is that strand in the world. When it does, it becomes a religion in a sense based on being able to control everything. There's a real sense of that for me, because Peterson in that clip talked about it would be good if our values weren't based on air, and that really stuck with me, because I was like, But going back to that sense of we don't know where creativity comes from, we don't know, just that
sort of respect for the mystery.
Respect for the mystery, and the ego really doesn't like letting go into a mystery. That's part of the inside of a lot of the Eastern traditions as well. So that kind of strikes me as an interesting point, because, to be honest, the irony is the pre-Socratic philosophers, they were getting their information, Parmenides and Empedocles, they were receiving their wisdom, which became logic, from mysterious kind of transcendent experiences. So we have based our values to a degree on what they might call air, but that concept that they might see as air is actually something potentially very different. I would see it as something potentially very different, that it has substance in it, that there is some substance that arises up that might be the root of creativity or whatever else. We don't know. But that sense of we don't know, there's a humility in that. And there's not very much humility in we do know, and it's just a matter, and anything we don't know, it's just a matter of time till we figure it out with science.
Yeah, because that's something that I've thought as well. It's like, at some point, your axioms have to be, or not have to be, your axioms are based on something irrational. You cannot rationally derive axioms. So the idea that we can be purely rational, at some point you are making a leap of faith. You cannot avoid making a leap of faith. It's like, what is your leap of faith going to be? What are your original axioms going to be? You have to kind of, at some point, assume some things. And so what are those things? And what was really interesting as well in the O2 debate, one of the things Douglas Murray said, which was, what we're seeing in the world seems to be that when you remove religion, people will make new religions out of anything. And I think we're seeing this particularly on the left at the moment, sort of like the whole equality, diversity, what you might call SJW thinking, or has become a new religion. I think we're all kind of aware that there's a real dogmatism that seems to have arisen, that is replacing the old religious stories, and obviously also kind of returning us to group identity and the danger of that in terms of the sovereignty of the individual and all of that, which I talk about with Jordan Peterson quite a bit, and we'll have coming up in one of our future videos. What I was also reminded of, there was a great line, one of the guys that we interviewed in America talked about, so scientism is this kind of worldview that sort of sees science as the guys in their white coats. It's the new religion, the guys in their white coats. And it happens at a very subconscious level. It's like you use scientific validation to support something. Like, oh, the benefits of meditation. oh, it's this airy-fairy thing. No, now there's mindfulness, and we have these studies, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Suddenly it's the new priesthood in many, many ways. But he had this great line, which was, scientism is more dangerous than jihadism, because at least jihadism doesn't create nuclear bombs. Scientism has all of the technologies, or AI, or any of these things. If you divorce science from any kind of ethical and moral responsibility, and it's clearly not obvious, as Peterson says, how you reintroduce it once you've got rid of it. Harris seems to think that you can. So this is a crucial question. Once you've removed kind of the ethical grounds, which we could argue, Rupert Sheldrake in one of our videos argued, they're ultimately Christian in origin. Like this ethical basis that you take as self-evident, Sam Harris, is actually based in a whole Christian story that's acted out through our actions and through our assumptions, and it's a Judeo-Christian worldview. You get rid of that, and you don't get an emergent morality. You get science torn free of emergent morality, and that is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, definitely. And Murray makes I thought that was a really good point by Murray, is around those new religions that we're seeing effectively, which are kind of ideological, kind of semi-strange political SJW style religions, and on both sides. In fact, it's like they're not based on what's come before. He says the people who are doing that, they don't know what their ancestors created before. They're just trying to create this split and build something on foundations that don't really exist. And that's quite a strong argument for really engaging in religion and seeing how these systems have survived for so long and what tenets they hold, which is another subtlety which was in the debate around religion as a political institution, organized religion, which I would be with Sam Harris on, around the massive problems with that, and religion as Jordan Peterson talks about it, which is like looking at the deep archetypal truth that exists within it, which doesn't really cross over necessarily with the Spanish Inquisition or what the Catholic Church is up to in a certain country.
Yeah, and as Peterson says, Sam Harris in his books and his lectures doesn't grapple with Dostoevsky, doesn't grapple with Nietzsche, doesn't grapple with these thinkers who've wrestled with the human condition, and often resorts to a caricature of religion that most religious people don't believe. So Sam, if you're watching and you want to respond to any of this, you're more than welcome. Your publicist has my details. Let's look forward to what we've got coming up.
Yeah.
And really exciting. Like I was very taken with some of Peterson's answers today, particularly about the relationship between the individual and collective identity in the left, which I'd never heard him make before. And this, I think, will be the centerpiece of what we're looking to do next week, because I've seen a few people on the left now really grappling with Jordan Peterson in a kind of sense of what does the left have to learn from Jordan Peterson, and that seems new to me. For a while, it felt like there's obviously the radical left which hates him, and then there's there's the sort of the soft left which is really unsure about him, and I had a sense for a while that they were just wanting him to go away, and he hasn't gone away. So now the sense is okay, and it's quite a brave thing for people on the left to be doing that, because he's obviously quite a kind of polarizing figure and hated figure by some areas of the left. So I want to kind of acknowledge the bravery of the people on the left who are engaging with his thought. And what we want to do next week is a whole series of programs looking at what can the left learn from Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good timing. I've noticed that sense of something shifting on the left around identity politics in particular, and the left kind of sorting its house out. And then last night, there's a now quite viral tweet of Barack Obama talking about effectively the dangers of identity politics, and specifically using Mandela as an example of someone who was able to transcend that, learned Afrikaans in prison, really, challenging and just disputing this idea of like, oh, if someone's, for example, white and male, they can't possibly understand you, or, just bringing back empathy. So Barack Obama bringing that into into the conversation, I think that's quite a big moment. So I think there is a kind of shift happening, and it's a good time.
Great. And any housekeeping? We've now launched our podcast channel.
Yes. So our podcast is also now available on Spotify. So type in Rebel Wisdom. It's the one with our logo, not the one with one podcast in February with a completely different logo. You can listen to that, but I haven't heard it yet. So yeah, Rebel Wisdom is on Spotify. It's on Podbean. We'll put all the information down in the show notes as well.
And subscribe to the channel so that you can be kept in the loop of the other Jordan Peterson clips, which will be probably coming up next week, and the whole series about Jordan Peterson and the left, and this kind of interesting crux point that we seem to be at in the conversation around identity politics. If you've enjoyed this and want to help us make more films, please consider sponsoring us on Patreon. Again, the details will be down there in the show notes. See you next week.